7 Tonight Show guests who arrived high as a kite. The Tonight Show's iconic blue curtain parts. Johnny Carson strides to his mark, delivers his monologue, and takes his seat behind the desk. For 30 years, this ritual played out with clockwork precision, television's most dependable nightly comfort. But behind that well-oiled machine lurked a chaotic reality that viewers rarely glimpsed. The unpredictable, sometimes alarming state of the celebrities waiting nervously backstage. Johnny had a sixth sense about it the moment they walked out, revealed a former Tonight Show producer who worked with Carson throughout the 1970s. He could tell within seconds if someone was drunk, stoned, coked up, or worse. His eyes would get this certain look, part amusement, part, oh God, here we go. While Carson maintained his legendary cool on camera, the reality behind the scenes was often far more dramatic. Production assistants were trained to watch for warning signs. Segment producers developed emergency backup plans. Executives occasionally hovered nervously in the wings. "We had code phrases," explained a former Tonight Show staffer. If Johnny touched his tie while introducing someone, it meant, "This person is not entirely sober." If he straightened his cards twice, it signaled the director to keep camera shots simple because our guest might be unpredictable. These subtle signals were part of an elaborate system developed over years to handle a situation viewers at home might never suspect. Major celebrities arriving at America's most prestigious talk show in states of significant chemical alteration. The 70s were wild, admitted the former producer. You'd have legitimate legends, Oscar winners, musical icons, literary giants, showing up so impaired that they could barely remember their own names. Johnny somehow had to make it all look normal while essentially babysitting someone having an entirely different experience of reality. Most shocking was the story of the beloved cultural icon who arrived so obviously under the influence that NBC executives nearly pulled the plug mid-interview. Until Carson convinced them, the audience thought it was all an elaborate comedy bit, or the counterculture hero whose chemical assistance was so apparent that Carson later joked to his crew, "I think I got a contact high just sitting next to him. Let's order pizza for everyone." Today, we're uncovering the most infamous cases of celebrities who appeared on The Tonight Show while clearly under the influence, and the remarkable ways Johnny Carson handled these unpredictable, sometimes career-defining moments. But first, we need to understand the unique pressures that drove so many stars to chemical courage before facing television's most watched and most powerful interviewer.
Thank you for coming. Friday night?
Yeah.
The green room, where nerves met substances. The Tonight Show's green room, where guests waited before their appearances, witnessed more pre-show anxiety than perhaps any other space in television history. "People don't realize the pressure," explained a former Tonight Show talent coordinator. Carson wasn't just any interviewer. A good appearance could launch careers overnight. A bad one could haunt you for years. And unlike today's pre-interviewed, heavily prepped talk show segments, Johnny wanted genuine, unplanned conversation. That terrified a lot of people. This pressure created the perfect environment for chemical assistance. Whether alcohol from the always stocked green room bar, pills from private stashes, or substances brought by entourages who knew their famous employers needed something to take the edge off. The green room bar was legendary, recalled a staff member who worked on the show in the 1970s and 80s. Carson himself approved the selection, top shelf everything. The unofficial policy was that 1 drink was fine, 2 was pushing it. But enforcing that with major stars, good luck. Beyond alcohol, the era's more permissive attitude toward recreational substances meant that many celebrities arrived having indulged in their preferred method of relaxation, from marijuana to cocaine to prescription medications, often in combinations that became apparent once the cameras rolled. "You have to remember the context," noted a television historian specializing in late-night TV. "This was when Studio 54 was at its peak. Rock stars were living like Roman emperors. Even Wall Street was awash in cocaine. The Tonight Show didn't exist in a vacuum. It reflected the culture of its time, including the substance use that permeated entertainment." Carson himself was known to enjoy a drink, but was famously in control on air. This created an interesting dynamic when interviewing guests who weren't exercising the same restraint. Johnny had this remarkable ability to modulate his approach based on a guest's state, explained his former producer. If someone was a little loose from drinks, he'd gently guide them through. If they were truly impaired, he'd simplify questions. help them along, and sometimes cut segments short while making it all seem natural. This adaptive approach would be tested repeatedly throughout Carson's tenure by guests who pushed the boundaries of broadcast acceptability, beginning with a counterculture icon whose chemical enhancement became part of his comedic persona.
Into a new lifestyle which doesn't require my presence. And so I can, if I don't want to, I don't have to get up at all and I still get credit for a full day.
George Carlin, the functioning stoner. George Carlin transformed from clean-cut comedian to counterculture hero during the early 1970s, growing his hair, changing his material, and embracing the era's drug culture. Changes reflected in his Tonight Show appearances. He riffed like a genius and grinned like a stoner, remembered a camera operator who worked many of Carlin's Tonight Show segments. There was never any question. George wasn't hiding it. That slightly glazed look in his eyes was practically part of his brand by then. Carlin appeared on The Tonight Show over 130 times, establishing himself as one of Carson's most reliable and popular guests. Yet despite this apparent approval, Carson never selected him as guest host, a distinction many other comedians received. Johnny enjoyed George enormously and respected his brilliance, explained a former Tonight Show writer, but he wouldn't let him guest host. The unspoken reason was reliability. Johnny knew George's lifestyle and wasn't confident he could handle the responsibility of running the show for 90 minutes. What made Carlin unique among our high-flying guests was his functionality. Unlike others who became incoherent or unpredictable, Carlin remained sharp, witty, and professional, just with a distinctly relaxed vibe that regular viewers definitely noticed. Carlin was what we called a functioning herbalist, quipped a Tonight Show staffer who worked closely with guests. The weed didn't impair him. It was part of his creative process. He was still George Carlin, just the more mellow, philosophical version. Carson's handling of Carlin revealed his pragmatic approach to the era's changing norms. While never explicitly acknowledging Carlin's state on air, Carson adapted his interview style, asking more open-ended questions that allowed Carlin's mind to wander in the fascinating, often hilarious directions that made him a counterculture hero. Johnny knew exactly what he was doing, noted the former producer. He'd toss George a topic and then sit back, letting him riff. The results were often brilliant, stream-of-consciousness monologues that wouldn't have happened if George had been entirely straight. Carlin himself later confirmed suspicions in his autobiography, writing, "Was I usually stoned during my Carson spots in the 70s? Of course I was. It was the 70s, and I was George Carlin. Do the math." While Carlin maintained his professional composure despite his chemical enhancement, our next subject demonstrated how quickly things could go sideways when a brilliant mind's substance use crossed the line from enhancement to impairment.
My friend,
Thank you.
they all mean it. You know, I don't know where to start. First of all, how you feeling?
I feel.
Richard Pryor, comedy's raw nerve exposed. If Carlin represented functional cannabis use, Richard Pryor embodied something more volatile. A genius comedian whose substance issues sometimes pushed Tonight Show appearances from brilliant to concerning in the blink of an eye. He was hilarious until he got cosmic, recalled a stage manager who worked several of Pryor's Tonight Show appearances. Richard could start a segment as the sharpest, funniest person on the planet, then suddenly his eyes would change and he'd go somewhere else mentally. Johnny would have to work like a traffic cop to get things back on track. Pryor's relationship with substances was complicated and well documented. His cocaine use, in particular, became increasingly problematic throughout the 1970s, culminating in his infamous 1980 freebasing accident. Several of his Tonight Show appearances captured him at different points along this trajectory. One particularly memorable segment from 1978 started conventionally enough, with Pryor discussing his latest projects. Midway through, however, he began a joke about his childhood that gradually dissolved into a disconnected series of observations, his focus visibly drifting. The audience, unsure if this was an intentional comedic choice or something unplanned, laughed nervously. You could see Johnny shift into protection mode, the stage manager continued. He jumped in with a quick question to redirect Richard, made a joke to cover the awkward moment, then smoothly transitioned to a commercial. It was masterful crisis management disguised as casual conversation. Carson's handling of Pryor demonstrated his deep respect for the comedian's talent alongside concern for his well-being. Unlike some hosts who might have exploited an impaired guest for laughs, Carson worked to showcase Pryor at his best while minimizing his vulnerable moments. Johnny genuinely loved Richard's genius, explained a former former NBC executive familiar with their relationship. He wasn't judgmental about the substances. That wasn't Carson's style, but he worried about Richard self-destructing. He'd sometimes check on him through mutual friends after particularly erratic appearances. What made Pryor's high appearances distinct from some others on our list was the unpredictability. His brilliance remained intact, but his focus and filter became increasingly unreliable, creating moments that walked a tightrope between comedy gold and broadcast concern. Carson had a unique approach with Richard, noted his former producer. He'd let him fly when the material was working, then create a safety net when things started going sideways. It was like watching a